Buckle up, I've got a bunch of stuff this week. Drawing comics is humbling. When you're drawing for fun, you can draw what's comfortable. When you start trying to tell a story, you have to draw what the story needs, which means that you're constantly being stretched out of your comfort zone. In order to handle that, I have to keep up with regular practice drawings. Drawing is not like riding a bicycle. It's more like trying to carry a handful of sand. It constantly slips through your fingers and you have to keep picking up more sand. I pulled up a reference photo and took some liberties to turn it into the shipwright. This drawing helped me to realize a small but important detail. As the protagonist, this character was the very first I designed for this project. The first pass worked, but it was also a surface level design. Here I drew him taking a breath, resting on a giant gorilla skull after accomplishing some exhausting task. I realized that I hadn't really figured out what the underlying layers of his costume were. That may seem small, like I'm getting caught in the weeds, but this is my central, load-bearing character. I'm going to be portraying this guy in many different circumstances, and I need to have a solid idea of what his costume is. Episode 2 is still early enough that it's worth taking the time to figure out these details. Future me will be thankful, so I figured out a plausible set of layers that keep the original look intact. I've also drawn him many times throughout the design stage, and that helped to show me ways I could simplify his gear. I changed up his belt so he just wears 2 simple utility pouches, and I also removed 1 extra color from his palette by changing up the belt's tooth clasp. With the shipwright updated, it's time to look at the story. Very early on, I attempted to outline a first episode. It was the introduction to the god of the hunt and his entourage. At this point, Bastion hadn't been created. I'm only just getting started, and already I can't imagine trying to do this without him. It was an incredibly helpful exercise because it showed me I wasn't even close to ready. With that knowledge, I turned all my focus towards fleshing out the setting. Now, several dozen videos later, I've established the overall look and feel of this world, so I'm circling back around to tell a version of this story that's almost totally different. Here's the thumbnail for the first panel. Having vanquished a sorceress and her shady coven, the valiant shipwright and his loyal hound Bastion heed a distant cry for aid. In keeping with episode 1, I wanted to hint at other adventures that happened between stories, so this time Bastion gets a treat. I think this may be one of my favorite drawings of him so far. I've still been trying to learn how to use 3D, so I've built up some plant models to use as underdrawings. For now, they just help me keep track of everything and create compositions. At the moment, I'm still too slow and inexperienced to use them directly in the final images, but that is a goal I have for down the road. You'll never believe it, but it felt a lot better drawing the shipwright, knowing what his shirt looks like under that robe. That may sound silly, but during my previous project, Tellurian, I started drawing the story before I had the robot character's anatomy figured out. He was always going to have the long coat, but while I was drawing the intro, I was hiding him while I furiously tried to figure out how his mechanical body worked. After that, I felt like I could draw him confidently in any situation. The same goes with this character. I feel better knowing that I won't be stuck if he decides to take off a layer to sleep at camp or if his robe is torn during a fight. When it comes to color, while adding the simple shading to this image, I knew I wanted both of the figures partly in shadow. It was working okay, but it didn't really click until I accounted for the semi-transparency of the leaves and added some green light back in. I wish I could say I was super smart and was planning on that the whole time, but for me, part of the fun of making images is when my hand is forced and I have to make choices that I hadn't originally accounted for. Okay, there's panel 1 of page 1. Now on to page 2. Obvious bait, yet honor bids them answer. There's a woman chained to a fallen sculpture. This character will appear across more than one panel, so I wanted to spend some time on an intentional design. I worked up 3 different versions, all variations on a similar story. She is someone who was a servant to one of the gods, but she was selected for this horrible purpose. What did she do to deserve this fate? Knowing the gods, likely nothing much. Maybe she underfilled a cup or smiled at the wrong time. Because I wanted it to be vague, there aren't any clues in her appearance. It's like negative design. The absence of a thing can convey as much meaning as the presence of a thing. To decide which version to use, my Dragon Tier patrons were a big help here. They voted and offered some helpful commentary, and the overwhelming winner was number 2. It's hard to overstate how helpful it is to have detailed model sheets to work from when drawing the actual comic, so I polished this one up a bit. Again, from a color perspective, I'm trying to keep my palette somewhat limited. This is partly inspired by my love of old-fashioned Sunday adventure comics, where they only had so many ink colors to work with. It also helps to keep characters legible. If there are only so many colors associated with one character, it's easier for the reader to follow them through the narrative. I also think it's a good exercise in intentionality. By limiting my palettes, I have to think harder about the few colors I do choose. Arbitrary decisions drive me crazy. If I do something without a good reason, it gets harder and harder to stay committed to it. I may have liked a shape or a color at the start, but if it was purely a gut decision, those things are prone to change. I may prefer a different thing down the road, and then I'm at war with myself, fighting through time over shifting whims. Instead, I try to take a moment to think of a rationale for everything. It doesn't have to be some grandiose statement on theme or anything, but having some reason means that when my mood shifts tomorrow, it doesn't matter what color I want then. I'm committed to a color with purpose. One example, and I'll try to describe it as vaguely as possible, the red of her loincloth. I chose it because later on, I want it to connect her to a particular location, where that color is far more prevalent. Now, allow me to embarrass myself. I still find sculpting in 3D to be very frustrating, and it's all down to the technical details you can only learn by working. The woman is chained to a giant fallen sculpture. I could have just made it a big rock, but several panels are going to take place around this landmark, so I wanted it to be easier for the reader to track what's going on. As with Tellurian, if there's ever a location that's going to feature across multiple images, it is so much easier to have a simple model to keep track of everything. While this story takes place across empires at their peak, I still want to imply that it's built on centuries of greatness. Once I had a generic base head, I decided to give it more character, imagining that this sculpture was based on some specific great king or god that once dominated this part of the world. He's got a longer face overall and a more prominent nose, and I'm always going to be trying to preserve a bit of that Art Deco idealization. With all the necessary pieces, I can finally start drawing. While this plays out, here's the fast version of my self-promotion. Click the buttons to trick YouTube into promoting this project. Join my Patreon to help make this story happen faster. Follow me on the social media that annoys you the least, and buy my personal art book or my previous story Tellurian so your FBI agent won't know when you're looking at my art. Links in description. One thing I'd like to experiment with a bit on this project is easing up on technique restrictions. For Tellurian, I gave myself some fairly strict rules on what techniques I could and couldn't use. I'll use the mist as an example. On Tellurian, I tried as much as possible to render everything with sharp lines. I rarely blurred anything unless it was lighting or atmosphere. For Dead Gods, I want to cut myself a little more slack and allow myself to use whatever technique will help to tell the story. In this case, I let myself blur the mist. It felt wrong at first, but I think it works, so it stays. I'm also going to experiment with text placement. If there's a good place for it, I'll see how it feels. You may also have noticed that I'm testing out a different font. It should be more legible. I have to go back into episode 1 and fix some continuity issues, so I'll be testing it out there too. With Tellurian, I put myself on a strict weekly release, but once an image was done, it was done. I didn't allow myself to correct anything unless it was a severe error. Because this project includes writing, I'm not going to be as strict about revisions. I'll go back and adjust as I learn. Okay, I don't know about you, but I already like this format better. Instead of blasting through the whole outline and all of the designs at the beginning and then working on the story, I think it works way better to release the designs and story together. This format might go a little slower, which I think will be worth it. But then, once I have a design, it'll be used for the rest of the story, so I may find things accelerate as I go. And there we have it, the first 2 panels of episode 2. It's already off to a way better start than the first time I attempted it. Lots of fun stuff yet to design for this episode. We'll see how far I can get for next week, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.